Are you ready to manage your work and personal world better to live a more fulfilling, productive life? Then you've come to the right place. Welcome to ProductivityCast, the weekly show about all things productivity. Here are your hosts, Ray Sidney Smith and Augusto Pinaud.
Welcome, ProductivityCast listeners, to our second episode. To find the links to all the resources we discussed, a raw transcript if you want to find the time signature of where we discussed something specific, or listen back to this episode from your desktop, please visit productivitycast.net/002. Everything you need about this episode is available at productivitycast.net/002. And with that, in this episode, we're going to be discussing writing and productivity. Enjoy. I just want to get right into it because this is a really important topic, I think, to everyone who is a productivity enthusiast and really wants to understand how to be more productive in their daily lives. I mean, from everything we do in our work days, there is some, form of writing, and we can do it more effectively, more efficiently. And I think that there are many things we should think about when it comes to writing, whether it be addressing an email appropriately, using email appropriately, being able to write that next report, being able to write, even just filling out forms, and even writing longer materials, whether that be blog posts, which a lot of us have to do for work now, and because of social media. And then, if you're an author or some other kind of creative professional and you're looking to write longer materials, it's really important for you to be able to do this in the most productive manner. And so I just wanted to kick it in with some sort of general principles for being able to write productively. And so let's just start off with basically the what I believe is the initial, and Augusto, you can push back if you think I'm off point here, but I really believe that reading is fundamental, right? It's really important for us to remember that in order to be good writers, we have to be good readers, because if you don't know what and how to read well, then you're not going to have the experience with the written word that's necessary for you to be able to put words down on paper or on screen that are really going to be effective.
If you don't read, you can't write, okay? And in a way, if you think on a weight trainer, okay, what a weight trainer do is a series of exercises so he can tone his muscles, okay? And he do that daily, and he do that constantly. And in writing, it's exactly the same thing. You need to read constantly and all the time, and different things, because people think, oh, well, I want to write, or I'm going to be writing about business, so I'm not in the business of reading fiction. And I completely disagree. I think you need to set a schedule of read everything from fiction to business to self-improvement to productivity to even religion, in the sense that it will show you how different people use different ways to express the same things. And I'm not advocating copy any of those styles, but it will allow you to understand and to identify your own style, and if you can spend the time to read and to do that training at the end of the day, how do you expect you are going to be ready for the moment that you are going to be trying to compete? That is, at the moment you're going to be trying to write that text. I, over the years, have people coming to me and say, well, how can you write this much? And I say, well, it's simple. You do it every day. Okay, you sit and write every day, and you read every day. And if you can only have a 10-minute to read every day, then you only have 5 minutes to write every day, because the relationship, I think, need to be 2 to 1. Twice the time of reading for the time you want to write.
Yeah, I have to say, I am guilty. I have to make the productivity confession that I have always leaned into nonfiction reading. And it's so powerful to be able to utilize fiction-based writing techniques when you are writing nonfiction, and I primarily write nonfiction. And, I have to say, you're absolutely right, Augusto. It's so important. It's almost imperative that you read both sides and different genres, from everything from Rumi to Shakespeare to books that have been translated from other languages, it really does give you a sense of how to communicate in the most broad way with specificity, and I mean broad way to the broadest audience, and with specificity meaning writing efficiently, basically writing so that every word counts. And I think, some people sort of hear, sort of the E. Annie Proulx sort of writing with such specificity that you write very, very precisely and therefore not as many words. I don't necessarily mean that, but I do mean that you should make most words count, right? I mean, you're not Charles Dickens. You're not being paid by the word. I presume you're not being paid by the word. If you are, then well, continue Dickens's perspective there. But if you're not getting paid by the word, you should still make sure that your words count. And so many times I receive an email from somebody, and it's just so wordy. And again, I'll probably, second confession of the podcast this week is that I happen to be a wordy writer. I tend to write multiple paragraph emails, and we'll talk about this when we get to sort of tools we can use. I've used a tool recently to help me sort of cut down on that, because I did find myself writing 4, 5, 6, 7 paragraphs of email, and then recognizing that while those emails were well written, they were unnecessary, and they're probably going to compete with my ability to go ahead and get a response. So always good to know that you should be reading, and you should also be reading your own writing. And I think that's really important. That's a mechanism for you to be able to see a final product from a year ago, to see where you were to where you are now. And I think that's really helpful to see how you grow and progress as a writer.
Two things in what you said. One, now it's good to know that my emails are short based on your standard, and that I have always, by the way, considered my emails are incredibly long. But because mine tend to be a couple of paragraphs, sometimes 3, but 7, I agree, it's long. But you need to get to be able to learn how, I'm not saying to use it every time, but you need to be able to write a 2-liner when you need it to be extremely effective. And the only way you're going to do that is if you read and you practice, and you can really have the technique under your arms. Otherwise, the moment you need to send that email where you are extremely frustrated, extremely mad, or is extremely important, and you need it to be a 2-liner for an effect, if you have never done it, you can't. Simple as that. The other thing for people is there's 2 things that, especially, until you find that and perfect that voice, if you are starting to write on a new topic, or you are starting to write something different or a new genre, start reading your stuff loud. Okay, talk. Don't read on your mind. Use your voice. There is 2 reasons for that. One, that pays the reading. That if you're just reading on your mind, you can go much faster. And second, allows you to really identify from a different sense how the structure of the sentence works. That's trick number 1. And trick number 2 is, while you are doing that, record yourself. Because if you miss stuff on the first reading, you will catch yourself on the second. And your mind will fill on the blanks. If I write a sentence that says the house read, my mind will fill in the blank and add the verb, and my mind will read the house is read. If you read that with your voice loudly, when you read the house read, you will say, hey, let me read that again. The house read. Oh, I'm missing the verb. And a lot of times the reason that's missed is because you are trying to go faster than what the process is, and write the first draft without any regard. But when you are going to edit, you need to slow down and be much more purposeful on what you are doing with the text.
We get to the next point, which is the power of planning. I have been, and I think you, Augusto, probably are on the same page, but again, you can disagree with me here. I really believe in the power of planning when it comes to writing. A well-planned written piece becomes a well-written piece. And, so many times I see people sit down and they write from start to finish, and they're like, wow, this is great. I had such an amazing writing session. And then they sit down other times and they can't write, and they have trouble doing so. And I just don't even understand, why you would put yourself through that torture of having this on, writing, off writing sort of feeling when if you had an outline, you would be able to write section by section and therefore have a successful writing session every time. And so I think that everything should be outlined. I would actually like it if every email had headings. It's like one of those things where, for a time, actually, I was actually sending emails, and if it was a multiple point email, I would put, bolded headings for what each item was so that people could jump to their particular, issue and just read that section. So anyway, my point is that when you really decide to start writing, you really should start to decide to outline well first. If you're going to write well and write productively, outlining is well worth the time.
When I do consulting and I'm talking to companies and we're talking about their problems they are having, with their marketing and sales and how they're not talking to each other, and there is a lot of what I do and how I'm going to help them. The first thing is that outline on where we are, identify the problems, identify the possible causes, and before we even go to where we want to go, because otherwise, what you're giving people, otherwise you can get distracted and pull. If you think on a meeting, I like to have an agenda when I sit on a meeting. Why? Because it works in the same way of the outline. It means we cannot discuss other topics. Of course we can, but at least we are going to make sure that whatever topics are on the original list are going to be touched, and we are going to be able to move forward with them.
If we don't plot out how we're going to get to our goal, we're not going to get to our goal. And so if you really want to write productively, you need to know what that, as I said, it's sort of like, directions to to a location, driving directions. You either look at a map and you see turn-by-turn instructions, or written turn-by-turn instructions. But, in essence, the outline is that. It's your ability to do that. And yeah, you can totally deviate off your course and then come back onto it to get back to where you need to go. While we're on that topic, it's sort of a good segue into the tools we can use to write more productively. And I'll just start off with that I do a lot of writing in Google Docs within the Google Drive suite. I do a lot of outlining, obviously, in that tool, but I also mind map a lot. So, you can find me using a wide variety of mind mapping tools that I then save the final mind map either exported as an RTF document, a word processor format document that I can save into Evernote or into Google Drive, into Google Docs, and so that's how I do a lot of my writing. And so it can be freeform. So a mind map, is just freeform, and then you can reorganize it once you get it into RTF. So think about it from that perspective. I like index cards, and I do a lot of outlining on index cards, and part of the reason is the constraint factor of the space. Otherwise, I maybe doodle for hours instead of thinking on the actual outline. But for the writing per se, I use an app that I've been using for years called Scrivener. I have a love-hate relationship with Scrivener, mostly love, but sometimes hate. And finally, after many, 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 many years, they moved to the iPad, and I can now edit into the Scrivener format in the iPad. They came some years ago with an ability to export on RTF. So I've been doing that for at least 2013, maybe 12. I've been able to work on my iPad with the Scrivener files, but I used to be forced to go to the Mac and once in a while back up and compile and all that. And now I can do all that in the iPad. That for me is key since, that's my main working machine. I also use an application called Grammarly, who we also have a love-hate relationship with, because they decide that they're not going to allow the app to work on the iPad. I have no understanding why, but because, at the end of the day, I'm a geek at heart, I discover that you can trick the app, and hopefully they're not listening. There is a software called iCap Mobile that is basically a browser. You can go into the browser, change the ID of your browser, and now you tell Grammarly that you are not an iPad, but you are a computer,
okay, a Mac or a PC, and then Grammarly works perfectly. So it's not that their software is not capable, it is that they have decided not to make it available for the mobile version of the browsers. And so I've been able to use Grammarly on the iPad that way for many years. If I need to give a text to somebody, obviously goes to Pages, because from there I can turn it into a Word or whatever I need to. And lastly, I use my iPhone to record my voice. As I said before, you need sometimes to record what you are reading. So especially when you are getting into something new, into a topic that is new for you, it is really important until you find that new voice of that topic you're creating.
Those are great tools. I wanted to make a note for folks that Pages, Apple Pages, is available within iCloud, and I only know that because I was recently utilizing it with a client who's in the midst of writing a book, and she was using Apple Pages, and so I said, okay, well, this would be a great opportunity for me to learn about how the collaboration tools work within the sort of iWork suite that has now gone into the iCloud platform. And so we tried it, and for all intents and purposes, it works just fine. We haven't gotten too heavy into it, but it was able to, allows us to be able to share the same document, edit the same document, comment on it, and so on and so forth. And it's a pretty decent interface. It's obviously lacking some of the more sophisticated pieces that you would have within the downloadable desktop version, but I think it's pretty competent for you to be able to do a lot of your writing in the cloud. So that's pretty cool. On the Google Docs side, I will make a note that there is an option to do speech to text. And so on the Mac, I believe it is Command Shift S, and on the PC, it's Control Shift S. And it opens up a microphone, and if you have a microphone embedded in your computer already, then you just speak, and Google Docs will then transcribe whatever you're saying. And I've used this in a lot of different environments, from being in a meeting and wanting to just take notes, and just turning on the Google Docs and keeping an eye on it, because if there's a silence, for example, then it stops listening, because it's like, hey, there's nobody talking. And quite often it's inaccurate, right? So it's maybe 85 to 90% accurate. So it's just the reality factor of you having multiple voices, you're not speaking directly into the microphone, that kind of thing. But if you are yourself recording something, then you can just put your headset on and speak directly into Google Docs, and the accuracy is getting better and better every day, at least for me. So that's really helpful. On the note about Scrivener has a Windows equivalent. It's freeware. It's an open source software called YWriter, and I'll put links to all these tools in the show notes. But YWriter is really great because it also operates on sort of just creating these independent RTF files. And what you're doing is you can write scenes, you can write characters, and then just sort of slice and dice them, put them together into the story that you're trying to create when you're doing, in this case, fiction pieces. So YWriter is pretty phenomenal. Two other tools that I really just want to note is that from an email perspective, Boomerang, the email tool that allows you to be able to send email later within the Gmail interface, and also can return email to you. Say you want to get the email to return to your inbox because someone didn't respond within X number of days. You can do that with Boomerang. Well, Boomerang has another functionality that they've built into the web browser extension, and it's called Respondable. And Respondable gives you an indicator as to how respondable your email is. And this is actually the tool that has been giving me feedback in terms of writing shorter, more concise emails, and emails that have clear questions. And so if you're really looking to get emails responded to, what the Boomerang Respondable extension is actually really phenomenal. I believe it's just built into Boomerang, but I'll provide a link to it in the show notes so that you can find it. But it's really phenomenal because it gives you just a little indicator that's like green, orange, or red, and it just green, yellow, or red, or something like that. And it tells you whether or not your email is going to be responded to with high likelihood or low likelihood based on its structure. And so I just think it's really it's a general help kind of thing. It's not like it's going to give you a guarantee of response, but I like knowing that it's in the green and that the email is, going to reasonably get a response based on the way that I've written it. And then the final tool is called Zotero. So if you do any kind of research, and especially if you're in an academic environment and you're writing scholarly pieces or anything like that, or if you're in school, Zotero is just awesome. You go to Zotero's website, you can download both the desktop tool and the web browser extension, and they work in Confluence to help you track any materials that you might be reading. And it does an automatic screenshot of the material. It downloads the material's metadata so that you can track all of that stuff for bibliography and footnoting, and it just does it so beautifully and well. Can't speak more highly of Zotero. This brings us to sort of writing challenges. What are the biggest writing challenges, at least that I see when I am working with clients? And the first one is, of course, the daily writing habit. And Augusto, you and I both know that a daily writing habit is not easy.
For writing specifically, I don't care how long you have been writing. I've been writing for a really long time. And there is two things that happen to writing that, first, it's hard to write. That's a fact. Okay. Second, it's hard to justify why we're not writing today. There is always something that seems more important than writing. And that makes writing daily really difficult. The other thing is we tend to think, if I get the inspiration, I will write. And in my opinion, inspiration only comes when you write it there and sit there every day, and inspirations know where to find. And sadly, the other issue you find is people forget that there is two processes and try to make it in one. In the same way, when we talk about getting things done and he talks about collect and then process, in writing, it's exactly the same. There is a lot of people who, during the years in doing GTD, especially at the beginning, try to collect and process at the same time, and the results are catastrophic. Writing is the same thing. You need to learn to write. Forget about grammar, commas. Just write. Just dump it there. And then and there's equivalent in productivity GTD to collect. And then come back and process that right. That's when you're going to edit. That's where you discover that you write right without a T, okay? And doesn't make any sense on the sentence. But it's perfect because then you let the brain go and the text is there. Now you can work in to make it a text, okay? It took me years to understand that writing is more about editing than about writing. Writing is the easy part. The difficult part is to edit what you wrote. But when you try to do it at the same time, it's really almost impossible. And the third thing is what I call the imposter syndrome, or what is called the imposter syndrome. And that happened to everybody, especially in writing. Okay, who I am to tell the people this? They're going to know it's fake. And now the reality is you are the guy who have read, the 200 books. Okay, the reality is you are the guy who has spent all this time researching this. And what you're saying is your perception of the point. But it's really hard to go over that and let it go. And you need to learn to work with that imposter syndrome, because the reality is even the most, if you listen to people, and right now her name is escaping me, Brené Brown finally comes to my mind, okay? If you listen to Brené Brown, who in most standards has been incredibly successful, she will tell you that she wake up every morning feeling like an imposter, okay? And she need to work every day against her syndrome. And that happened to everybody who writes. I don't care if you write fiction, I don't care if you write nonfiction or both or anything. It is a job at the end of the day. Writing, it is a job. And you need to deal with that and deal with the beautiful part of the job and the ugly parts of the job. And feeling like an imposter is one of the ugly things of the job.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more that, most of if you're going to take writing as a serious part of your overall productivity, which I think everybody should, as I said at the top of our show, you spend a lot of time writing and you don't even recognize, maybe you do recognize it, maybe you don't, but a lot of people don't recognize that writing is part of the job because you do so much of it, especially with regard to email or even messaging in Slack or documents that you might be writing. And a daily writing habit allows you to be able to structure focus time there. And, it's sort of like the Pareto principle of writing would be that 80% of your time is spent editing, 20% of your time is originating content. And, you really need to spend, more time editing than you do writing. And that's just the reality of it. To have good, writing pieces, the outcomes, you really need to learn how to edit well. So definitely, take the critic off your shoulder when you're generating content, and then put the critic back on your shoulder when you're editing content. People talk about writer's block, and I think, writer's block really just means that you haven't found the right inspiration at that moment. And this is where I highly recommend reading or finding material that can be inspirational to you so that you can start writing. I mean, again, Augusto can talk probably for the next hour on resistance, but since we don't have time for that, I really do think that we should remember that there's no such thing as writer's block, in my opinion. There is literally just you not writing or you writing. And you always have a dialogue going on in your head, and writing begets writing. So if you write anything, just start writing, then you are able to then start to bring yourself back onto the path of what you intend to write about. So don't think that writer's block is anything more than a fiction. You start writing anything, and your mind will start getting into the routine of writing when you tell it to. So I think that there's a real important factor about that. And, Anne Lamott, who wrote the book Bird by Bird, talks about having what she calls, I'm quoting here, shitty first drafts. And so, those first drafts, those crummy first drafts, those bad first drafts are imperative to you getting to great pieces of work at the end of the day. Good pieces of work. It doesn't have to be great. It just has to be good. And, the reality is that once you do that, you're able to then edit into, good places.
More than that, I want to give our listeners with a quote about writing from a writer called Robert Haas, who said, "It's hell writing, and it's hell not writing. The only tolerable state is having just reading." And think about that when you come. It is really hard to write. And if you have not been writing, it's harder or as hard to not be writing. The only fun state is written, where you could see the stuff, where you can see the stuff you publish, where you can see the books on the shelf. But the only way that will happen is if you go through hell with a smile.
Smiling is always a good tactic, right? Smile in the mirror, as they say. So for those of you who might have some writing challenges, on our website, if you go to ProductivityCast.net, and again, the link is there in the show notes. If you go to ProductivityCast.net, you can find a form. You can send us your questions regarding issues you might have with writing productivity, and Augusto and I are happy to tackle them. We also have a voice recording tool, so if you want to be on the podcast, we can filter through some of the good questions, and maybe you'll hear your voice here on ProductivityCast asking the question. So go ahead and visit the website. And so this wraps up another episode, our second episode of ProductivityCast, the weekly show about all things personal productivity.
Let's go and do some writing.
That's it for this episode of ProductivityCast, the weekly show about all things productivity, with your hosts, Ray Sidney Smith and Augusto Pinaud.